My daughter gave me a pen to sign away my home. She never imagined I would use that same pen to write her out of my life forever. Before I begin, thank you for being here, for being part of this community. Please let me know in the comments where you're listening from. It means the world to me. Now, let me tell you what they did to me. My name is Imani Washington. For 70 years, my life has been defined by two things: the unwavering love for my family and the deep satisfaction I find in order. Some might call it being particular, but for me, a polished floor and a balanced budget book are not chores. They are the cornerstones of a stable, dignified life. A life I built with my own two hands, alongside my late husband, James. I believed this foundation was unshakable. I was wrong. The story truly begins on the morning of my 70th birthday. The house felt alive with the quiet hum of anticipation. The air was thick with the scent of beeswax from my weekly floor polishing, and more potently, the sweet cinnamon-laced aroma of my famous peach cobbler cooling on the kitchen counter. This was my fortress, a modest but immaculate two-story home my late husband James and I had built, not with a loan, but with calloused hands and decades of relentless saving. I stood at my dining room table, a woman whose posture was as unyielding as her principles. My silver hair was neatly pinned and my movements were economical and precise as I laid out the fine china for the small party I was expecting later. Each plate, each polished fork, each crystal glass was placed with an ingrained sense of order. This wasn't merely tidiness, it was a philosophy. It was the physical manifestation of a life dedicated to prudence and diligence. On the sideboard, photo albums were stacked neatly. Pictures of James, his warm smile beaming, gone 5 years now. Pictures of our only daughter, Nia, as a little girl with bright ribbons in her hair, then as a graduate, then as a bride. As I smoothed a crease from the linen tablecloth, my mind drifted back. I saw myself as a young woman, my hands stained with grease from the machinery at the factory where I worked alongside James. We were saving for a dream that seemed impossibly distant. Every penny was accounted for in a little black notebook I still kept in my desk drawer. We denied ourselves holidays, fancy clothes, and restaurant meals. While others bought new cars, we patched up our old Ford. But every sacrifice was a brick in the foundation of this house, a deposit into the future security we were building for our family, for Nia. I remembered the overwhelming pride on the day we had finally saved enough to buy the land. James had held my hands, rough and worn as they were, and kissed them. "We did it, Imani," he had whispered, his voice thick with emotion. A home. For us. For our girl. We had not just built a house. We had built a legacy. A safe harbor and, one day, a substantial inheritance that would ensure Nia never had to struggle as we had. A key turned in the lock, pulling me from my reverie. Nia and her husband Reggie swept in, bringing a gust of cold air and a flurry of noise that seemed alien in the tranquil space. "Happy birthday, Mom," Nia chirped, planting a kiss on my cheek that felt more like a formality than an expression of affection. Reggie followed, offering a limp handshake and a mumbled, "All the best, Imani." Nia, a woman who wore her ambition like expensive perfume, scanned the room. "Oh, Mom, you shouldn't have gone to all this trouble. We could have just taken you out to eat." "Nonsense," I said, my smile genuine. "It's my birthday. I wanted to celebrate it here in my home. A big house like this is so much work, especially now you're 70, Reggie added, patting his slight paunch. "We've been thinking, you should be taking it easy." I felt the familiar faint prickle of unease I often did when they visited. Their concern always felt pointed. It seemed to circle not around my well-being, but around my capabilities. I dismissed it, as I always did. This was my child, the center of my world for so long. To doubt her felt like a betrayal of James's memory. "The work keeps me young," I replied crisply, turning to the kitchen. "The cobbler is ready. Nia, could you get the cream from the fridge?" We spent the next hour in a dance of preparation. I moved with the easy grace of someone who knew her domain intimately, while Nia and Reggie moved with the clumsy impatience of visitors. They spoke of their stressful jobs, their mounting expenses, the need for a bigger car. I listened, interjecting with quiet questions, feeling a growing distance I couldn't quite name. As the time for the other guests to arrive drew near, Nia walked over to the dining table. She was carrying a large, expensive-looking leather folder. It was dark brown, almost black, and seemed to absorb the light in the room. She placed it on the table right next to the spot where I would sit. The folder's stark corporate presence was a jarring note in the symphony of homey comfort I had so carefully composed. "We have a special birthday surprise for you, Mom," Nia announced, her voice slick with manufactured sweetness. "Something to make your life much, much simpler from now on." She patted the folder. "We'll open it after the cake." I looked at the folder. It sat there like a threat, its sharp corners and cold leather a stark contrast to the soft, round edges of the birthday dessert. A profound sense of unease settled in my stomach, cold and heavy. For the first time in my own home, I felt a tremor of fear, a premonition that the orderly world I had spent a lifetime building was about to be shattered. The party was a pleasant affair on the surface. Neighbors from down the street, friends from my old church group. They all came to wish me well. They complimented my baking, admired my garden through the large window, and shared fond memories of James. I played the role of the gracious hostess, my smile never wavering, but my eyes kept straying to the dark leather folder on the dining table. It was a silent, ominous guest, waiting patiently for the festivities to end. Nia and Reggie were the perfect doting daughter and son-in-law, refilling glasses, laughing at jokes, and repeatedly mentioning how they were taking care of Mom now. Finally, the last guest departed, leaving behind the scent of perfume and the remnants of celebration. The house felt quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet now. It was heavy, expectant. Only Nia, Reggie, their quiet teenage son, Leo, and I remained. Leo, who had spent most of the party looking uncomfortable, gave me a small, worried smile. "All right, time for your real present," Nia declared, her voice unnaturally bright. She retrieved the folder and placed it in front of me with a theatrical flourish. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for it. I expected a portfolio of professionally taken family photos, perhaps, or a certificate for a cruise. I unzipped the folder. Inside, there was no celebratory gift. There was only a thick stack of dense legal documents filled with paragraphs of small, impenetrable text. At the top of the first page, I read the words "power of attorney" and "home sale contract." A cold dread washed over me. "What is this?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "It's our gift, Mom," Nia said, pulling up a chair. Reggie stood behind her, a hand on her shoulder, a united front. "We've done all the hard work for you. We know how much this house is to maintain, and at your age, it's just not safe or practical. So we found you a lovely, modern apartment in the Parkside Senior Living, a retirement community. It's wonderful. They have activities, on-site medical staff, everything. You're moving me out of my home?" I stared at her, uncomprehending. "We're helping you downsize," Reggie corrected smoothly. "It's the sensible thing to do. We even have a buyer for the house, a fantastic offer. All you have to do is sign these papers. They give us power of attorney to handle all the finances and finalize the sale. It's just a formality to make everything easy for you." The clinical, rehearsed logic of their words was like a physical blow. They weren't asking, they were informing. They had used my 70th birthday, a day meant to honor my life, as the pretext for erasing it. They had weaponized my age against me, framing their greed as concern. I looked at my daughter's face and saw no love, no empathy, only a chilling, determined ambition. I saw a stranger wearing Nia's skin. "But this is my house," I stammered, the foundation of my world crumbling beneath me. "James and we built this place." "And you did a wonderful job, Mom," Nia said, her voice softening into a tone of condescending pity. "But that was then. This is now. You have to be realistic. We're just trying to protect you and to protect your assets, of course." The mention of assets hung in the air. That was it. The house, the savings, the inheritance. It wasn't about my safety. It was about securing their future. I felt a wave of nausea. I looked at my grandson, Leo, who was staring at his parents with a look of pure horror, his face pale. He opened his mouth to speak, but Nia shot him a look that silenced him instantly. I felt trapped. My mind, usually so sharp and clear, was a maelstrom of shock and grief. This was my daughter, my only child. The bedrock of a mother's love, the instinct to trust my own flesh and blood, was a powerful, overwhelming force. They were telling me this was for my own good. They were my family. In that moment of profound emotional turmoil, my defenses were down. Overwhelmed, heartbroken, and utterly bewildered, I picked up the pen they offered me. With a hand that felt disconnected from my body, I signed where Nia's perfectly manicured finger pointed. One signature after another. The moment the last signature was complete, the atmosphere shifted. The performance was over. Nia's posture straightened, her expression turning from one of feigned concern to brisk efficiency. She gathered the papers, zipped them into the folder, and stood up. Here. All done, she said, her voice devoid of all warmth. The new tenants want to take possession in 2 weeks, so we'll need to start packing right away. I'll drop off some boxes tomorrow. 2 weeks. They were giving me 2 weeks to dismantle 70 years of my life. The cage door had not just been presented, it had been slammed shut and locked. Not in some sterile facility, but in the heart of my own living room. We have to go, Reggie said, already heading for the door. Leo, come on. Leo looked at me, his eyes welling with tears. Nana, I'm so sorry, he whispered, but his mother grabbed his arm and pulled him away. Don't be dramatic, Leo. And then they were gone. I was left standing alone in the center of the room. The lingering scent of peach cobbler and beeswax mingled with the cold odor of betrayal. On the table, next to the pristine china I had laid out with such love, sat a single untouched slice of my own birthday cake. The silence that descended was no longer peaceful. It was the profound, deafening silence of abandonment. The night that followed was the longest of my life. Sleep was an impossible dream. I wandered through the silent rooms of my house, each object a testament to a life I no longer controlled. I touched the worn armchair where James used to sit, the faint indentation still visible after all these years. I ran my fingers over the pencil marks on the kitchen doorframe, charting Nia's growth from a small child to a tall teenager. These weren't just things, they were memories, anchors to my identity, and in 2 weeks, they would all be gone, packed into boxes by the very person they were meant for. I felt as if I were a ghost in my own life, already erased. The next morning, the sun streamed in with cheerful indifference. The house was filled with the debris of the party, a few stray napkins, a forgotten glass. It felt like the scene of a crime. I sat at my kitchen table, the untouched slice of cake a mocking monument to yesterday's betrayal. The despair was a physical weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I was 70 years old. What could I possibly do? They had the papers, they had the law, it seemed on their side, they had my signature. The system I had respected my entire life was now the cage that trapped me. I forced myself to stand. Action, any action was better than succumbing to this suffocating inertia. I would start packing. It was a surrender, but it was something to do. I decided to begin with the old newspaper stacked in the study. A task that required no emotional investment. I needed string to bundle them. I remembered a miscellaneous drawer in the old desk, a place where James had kept odds and ends, stray screws, old keys, rubber bands. My fingers, stiff with age and sorrow, rummaged through the drawer's contents. They brushed against a smooth, worn piece of cardboard. I pulled it out. It was an old business card, yellowed at the edges. The text was printed in a simple embossed font. Arthur Coington, Esquire, Integrity, Trust, since 1958. Mr. Coington, the old lawyer, a man as sturdy and unshakable as the oak trees in the town square. He had handled the legal work for our house purchase 50 years ago. He had executed James's will with quiet compassion and impeccable professionalism. He was a man of the old school, a man for whom a contract was a sacred trust, not a weapon. Holding the small card in my hand was like finding a single solid stone in the middle of a mudslide. It was a glimmer of hope, a tiny spark in the crushing darkness. Nia and Reggie had used a system of rules and contracts to trap me, but Mr. Coington represented that same system. He understood it. He respected it. And a sudden electrifying thought shot through me. Systems have rules. And rules can be understood. They can be used not just to trap, but also to defend. The spark ignited a fire. I stood straighter, the weight on my chest seeming to lessen. A cold, hard anger began to replace the despair, an anger as clear and solid as ice. I walked into my living room and stood before the mirror. I looked at the woman reflected there, the silver hair, the new lines of grief around my eyes. But behind the sorrow, I saw the flicker of the young woman who had worked in the factory, the wife who had stood by her husband, the mother who had sacrificed everything. I had survived a segregated South, the lean years, the loss of my beloved James. I had built this life from nothing. A powerful monologue began to form in my mind, a silent reclaiming of my own story. They think they can erase me. They think because I am 70, I am finished. They see an old woman. They don't see the girl who saved every penny. They don't see the woman who laid the bricks of this foundation with her own sweat. They see a liability. They don't see a survivor. My resolve hardened, not into the hot, messy rage of my daughter, but into something cold, pure, and unbreakable. I thought to myself, my eyes locking with my own reflection, they thought they had buried me. They didn't know I was a seed. In that moment, the victim in me died. A strategist was born. My first act of defiance was not to scream or cry. It was to walk away from the packing boxes. I went to the telephone in the hall, my movements now filled with a renewed steely purpose. I looked at the business card, my fingers tracing the embossed letters, and dialed the number. My voice, when I spoke, was not the trembling whisper of a frightened old woman. It was the firm, clear voice of Imani Washington, a woman who was about to fight for her life. "Mr. Covington's office," a polite secretary answered. "Good morning," I said, my tone unwavering. "My name is Imani Washington. I need to schedule an urgent appointment with Mr. Covington today, if at all possible. It is a matter of the utmost importance." I hung up the phone a few moments later with an appointment for 3 o'clock that afternoon. I looked at the half-packed box of newspapers with disdain. The battle plan was already forming in my mind, a series of moves as meticulous and ordered as the life they had tried to steal from me. I would not be packing my home. I would be fortifying it. I arrived at Mr. Covington's office 10 minutes early. The building was old, made of dark stone, exuding an aura of permanence and gravity. Inside, the air smelled of old paper, leather, and polish. It was the scent of the law, of order, of consequence. Mr. Covington, a man now in his late 70s, with a full head of white hair and eyes that had seen everything, greeted me not with pity, but with a deep professional respect. "Imani," he said, his voice a low rumble, "it has been too long. Please come in. What can I do for you?" In the quiet of his wood-paneled office, I laid out the story. I spoke without emotion, my voice steady and factual. I detailed the events of my birthday, the leather folder, the signing of the documents. I recounted the conversation with Nia and Reggie, my words precise, omitting nothing. I was not a victim telling a tale of woe. I was a client presenting a case. As I spoke, I watched Mr. Covington's face transform. His initial look of compassionate listening slowly hardened. His eyebrows drew together. A muscle in his jaw began to twitch. The professional calm in his eyes was replaced by a cold, controlled fury. When I finished, he was silent for a full minute, his fingertips steepled before him. "The vultures," he finally said, the words sharp and venomous. "To do this on your birthday, to prey on a mother's trust, it is despicable." He took a deep breath, his professional demeanor snapping back into place like a shield. "May I see the documents?" I slid a copy of the power of attorney across the polished desk. Mr. Covington read it slowly, his eyes missing nothing. "It is a comprehensive power of attorney, Imani." "They were thorough," he said grimly. "Challenging it on the grounds of coercion will be difficult and, more importantly, slow. They will have emptied your accounts long before we get a hearing." "The accounts," I said, my voice firm. "That is what this is about. The house is the prize, but the money is the fuel. Without the money, their plans will fail." A flicker of admiration crossed Mr. Covington's face. "Precisely," he said. "The power of attorney gives them authority over your affairs, but you are still Imani Washington. You are of sound mind and body. You have not been declared incompetent. Therefore, you still possess the authority to manage your own affairs as well. We must act before they do. We must act now." The legal battle became a breathtakingly swift counteroffensive. There were no letters, no formal petitions. There was only immediate, decisive action. Mr. Covington picked up his phone. "Brenda," he said to his secretary, "cancel my 4 o'clock and get me Director Perry at the Citibank on the line. Tell him it is urgent." An hour later, I was sitting not in a lawyer's office, but in the plush chair of the bank director. Mr. Perry, a man who had always been slightly intimidated by my sharp financial acumen, looked deeply uncomfortable. He had the power of attorney from Nia on his desk, faxed over that morning. "Mrs. Washington, Mr. Covington," he began nervously, "your daughter has already been in contact according to this document." Mr. Covington cut him off, his voice carrying the immense weight of his office. "Director Perry, is Mrs. Washington your client or is her daughter? Is Mrs. Washington sitting here before you of sound mind?" "Of course, but the document allows her daughter to act on her behalf. It does not strip Mrs. Washington of her own agency," the lawyer stated, his voice like ice. My client is here to give you a direct instruction regarding her assets, and I am here as her attorney to witness that she is doing so of her own free will and with full mental capacity. This was my first taste of victory. I felt the power in the room shift. I was no longer just an old woman. I was a client flanked by the law itself. I looked Director Perry in the eye. "Mr. Perry," I said, my voice calm and commanding, "I wish to liquidate my entire investment portfolio immediately. Then I want you to transfer the full balance of all my accounts, savings, checking, and the liquidated portfolio into a new trust account. This account is to be accessible only with 2 signatures, my own and that of my attorney, Mr. Coington." The director paled. "But Mrs. Washington, that is a significant sum. Your daughter's plans?" "My daughter's plans," I said, my voice dropping, "are no longer your concern, nor are they mine. Execute my instructions." The rest of the afternoon was a blur of paperwork, but it was triumphant paperwork. Signatures were made, transfers were initiated. By the time we walked out of the bank, the financial wellspring of Nia's greed had been turned to dust. My life savings, my inheritance for Nia, was secure in a legal fortress that Nia could not breach. The confrontation came just as I was sitting down with a cup of tea back in Mr. Covington's office. My phone rang. It was Nia. "Mom, what have you done?" Her voice was a shriek of panic and fury. "I was just at the bank. They said the accounts are empty. Where is the money?" I took a slow, deliberate sip of my tea before answering. I held the phone slightly away from my ear, my expression serene. "These," I said, my voice as cool and smooth as river stone, "is no longer your concern, Nia." "What are you talking about? I have power of attorney. It's my right to manage your affairs." "You are correct," I replied calmly. "You have the right to manage my affairs, and I have the right to have no affairs to manage. You wanted my house. You wanted my money. You now have a useless piece of paper and a house that you will have to sell at a loss to pay the legal fees. You will be hearing from Mr. Coington regarding the revocation of your power and the cancellation of the sale. Do not call me again." I ended the call, placing the phone gently back on its cradle. I had seized control. The narrative, the battle, the future, they were all mine again. The revenge, when it came, was not an act of fiery passion, but one of cold, quiet, and legally irreversible precision. The morning after I had secured my funds, I was back in Mr. Covington's office. "I want to create a foundation," I stated, my voice resonating with a newfound authority. "And I want to draft a new will, an ironclad one." Mr. Covington listened, a grimly satisfied smile playing on his lips. For the next hour, I dictated my terms. I was not just dismantling Nia's inheritance, I was repurposing it. The entirety of my liquidated assets, the 6-figure sum that Nia and Reggie had already spent in their minds, was to be the endowment for a new charitable foundation. I named it with stark simplicity. The Refuge Foundation. Its mission, as I dictated it to the lawyer, was to provide legal aid and emergency housing for elderly individuals who were victims of financial abuse and at risk of losing their homes. I was turning my pain into a shield for others. My new will was a masterpiece of legal finality. My house, once it was freed from the now contested sales contract, was to be left to my grandson, Leo, to be held in trust until his 25th birthday. To my daughter, Nia Washington, I bequeathed $1, a symbolic and deeply insulting gesture, making it clear I was intentionally disinheriting her. As a final devastating blow, I included a clause stating that the $1 was to be paid from the proceeds of the sale of my dining room furniture, the very table at which the betrayal had taken place. The unraveling of Nia and Reggie's life was swift and brutal. They had been living on credit, counting on the imminent windfall from my assets to finance a risky business venture Reggie had started and to secure the deposit on a much larger, more ostentatious house. Their plans were a house of cards, and I had just removed the bottom card. I didn't need to spy to see the results. The small town ensured the news traveled fast. I heard from a neighbor that there was a furious shouting argument in the driveway of Nia's house late one night. A week later, while walking to the market, I saw a tow truck outside their home, hooking up Reggie's late model BMW. He had missed the payments. Their social facade crumbled. They had to pull out of the purchase of their new house, losing their deposit and suffering a profound public humiliation. Their greed had left them with nothing but debt and shame. The most important part of my reclaimed life, however, was not about their downfall, but about reinforcing my true legacy. One afternoon, there was a tentative knock on the door of the small, furnished apartment Mr. Covington had helped me rent temporarily. It was Leo, He was holding a large, worn photo album, the one with all the pictures of me and James when we were young. Nana, he said, his voice choked with emotion. I saved this. They were going to throw them all out. He looked at me, his young face a mask of misery and guilt. I'm so sorry. I knew what they were doing was wrong. I tried to say something, but I was scared. I felt a surge of love for the boy. I took the album and placed it on the table, then wrapped my arms around my grandson. It's not your fault, Leo. You have a good heart. That is what matters. I sat him down and made him a cup of tea just as I used to. I want you to understand something, I said, my voice gentle but firm. The legacy your grandfather and I wanted to leave wasn't just money in a bank account. It was the wisdom of how to build a life. It's about dignity and honesty and self-sufficiency. It's about knowing the value of things, not just the price. Your parents forgot that. Don't you ever forget it. He looked at me, his eyes shining with unshed tears, and nodded. In that moment, I knew I had saved the most important part of my inheritance. I had passed my values on to the next generation, bypassing the corruption that had tainted my own child. Nia and Reggie were defeated, not by a vengeful plot, but by the simple, stark consequences of their own actions. I, meanwhile, was no longer just surviving. In my small, temporary apartment, surrounded by a few treasured possessions and the love of my grandson, my new, secure, and self-determined life was already beginning. The final confrontation, when it came, was not the dramatic showdown I might have once imagined. It was a pathetic, whimpering affair. 2 months after the betrayal, Nia appeared at the door of my new apartment. She was a different woman from the one who had coolly presented the leather folder. Her expensive clothes seemed to hang off her. Her face was gaunt and her eyes were hollow with desperation. Mom, she began, her voice cracking. You can't do this. We're ruined. Reggie lost his job. We're going to lose the house. You have to help us. I looked at my daughter not with hatred, but with a profound and sorrowful clarity. I saw a woman who had gambled everything on greed and lost. The apology she offered was weak, laced with self-pity and blame. It was all about what had happened to them, not about what they had done. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I stood in my own doorway, a queen in my own small, bright kingdom, and delivered my final verdict. There is nothing to discuss, Nia. You made a choice on my 70th birthday. You chose money over your mother. I have now made my own choices. I choose peace. I choose dignity. But I'm your daughter, she cried, tears of frustration streaming down her face. Yes, I said, my voice soft but final, you are, and I will mourn the daughter I thought I had for the rest of my days, but the woman standing in front of me is a stranger. You are not welcome in my home. I closed the door, not with a slam of anger, but with the quiet, decisive click of a boundary being set, firm and forever. I leaned against the door for a moment, took a deep breath, and then turned away, leaving the past on the other side. My new life blossomed. The legal formalities were completed. The new will was signed and registered. A powerful scene that took place in Mr. Covington's office, with the newly appointed director of the Refuge Foundation present. My act of defiance had been transformed into a permanent legal legacy of hope. I refused to be a passive benefactor. I began volunteering at the foundation's small office twice a week. My sharp mind, honed by decades of managing my own finances, was a formidable asset. I helped other seniors read the fine print on contracts. I offered counsel on budgeting, and I provided a pillar of strength for those who, like me, had been made to feel powerless. I was no longer just Imani Washington, the retired widow. I was a force for good in my community, my victory expanding from a personal one to a communal one. The final scene of my story mirrored the first, yet it was profoundly different. I was in the living room of my new apartment. It was smaller than my old house, but it was filled with light. The furniture was modern and comfortable, chosen and paid for by me. There was no scent of beeswax, but the fresh aroma of coffee and the clean smell of the books that lined my shelves. I was sitting in a comfortable armchair, not polishing silver for a party or balancing a budget book, but simply reading. The afternoon sun streamed through the window, warming my face. The peace I felt was not the fragile earned peace of my old life, a peace that had been dependent on the order of things and the trust I placed in others. This was a new kind of peace. It was forged in fire, unbreakable and profound. It was the peace of self-determination. It was the quiet, unshakable tranquility of a woman who had faced erasure and had chosen to write her own ending. I looked out the window at the city park below, at the people living their lives, and a final thought settled in my mind. clear and true. True wealth was not a house or a bank account that could be stolen. It was not something you could inherit. True wealth was the dignity you refused to surrender and the strength you found to reclaim it. The seed they had tried to bury had not just broken through the concrete. It had grown into a garden,